I spent 40 years battling the North Sea to build the Nordhaven Empire, only to realize that those I considered family were busy betraying me for the sake of money.
I stood dead still in the shadows of the hallway, staring at my own damn death certificate, sitting right there on the coffee table. My wife, Gudrun, just took a slow, cold sip of champagne, her fingers tracing that 18 million euro insurance claim like it was a love letter. And Jonas? The son I would given my life, for he just looked at her and smirked. "Dad's starting to forget things, Mom," he said, his voice flat and trite. Honestly, this is the best way out for him. My throat went bone dry. My chest, feeling like a rusted anchor, was crushing me into the floorboards. I'd spent 40 years fighting North Sea gales to build the Nordhaven Empire, only to find out the people I called family were busy burying me alive for a payday. When the people you love trade your soul for a bank balance, where the hell do you even go from there? Subscribe now to see how I burn their perfect plan to the ground. And tell me, what would you do if you caught your family celebrating your death while you were still breathing right behind them? The rain in Reykjavik doesn't just fall, it bites. It's that cold, stinging kind of wet that settles deep in your marrow, reminding a 70-year-old man like me that my bones ain't what they used to be. I stood on my own front porch, my luggage feeling like a ton of lead, just staring at the heavy oak door of my house. I'd finished the Oslo deal 3 days early because, frankly, I was tired of the suits and the fake smiles. I wanted my own bed. I wanted my wife. I wanted to believe that after 40 years of building Nordhaven Maritime from a single rusted trawler into a shipping empire, I finally earned some peace. But the house felt wrong. The lights in the study were on, and because I hadn't called ahead, nobody was there to play the part of the welcoming family. I turned the handle. It wasn't locked. That was mistake number one. In my world, an unlocked door is an invitation for a predator. I stepped inside, my boots silent on the Persian rug. Because the hallway was dark, I could see straight into the study. The safe was wide open. Not just cracked, wide open. And there stood Jonas, my golden boy, the CFO I'd handpicked to lead Nordhaven into the next decade. He was shuffling through my private files like he was looking for a lost remote. Gudrun was right there beside him, leaning against my mahogany desk, sipping a glass of expensive red. They weren't arguing, they were strategizing. "The insurance adjuster needs the signatures by Friday," Gudrun said, her voice sounding like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "If we're going to claim the full 18 million, the missing at sea narrative has to be airtight." I froze. My heart didn't race. It went cold, like a ship's engine hitting an iceberg. Because I was standing in the shadows, they couldn't see the ghost of the man they were already burying. "Don't worry, Mom," Jonas replied, his voice smooth as silk. The Oslo trip was the perfect setup. A tragic accident during a harbor inspection. Nobody's gonna question it, especially once the medical report goes live. It's all right here. He tapped a thick blue folder on the desk. I needed to see it. Because my curiosity was stronger than my fear, I waited until they stepped into the kitchen to grab a bottle of water. I slipped into the study like a thief in my own life. My hands were shaking. Just a little. As I flipped open that folder, it was all there. A life insurance policy for 18 million euros. A draft to trigger the incapacity clause in our family trust. And then, the kicker. A medical evaluation signed by some doctor I'd never heard of, stating that I, Arnar Magnusson, was suffering from rapid cognitive decline and memory loss. They weren't just waiting for me to die. Because I still held 62% of the voting rights, I was an obstacle. So, they were turning me into a vegetable on paper. Arnar? The voice hit me like a physical blow. I snapped the folder shut and turned around. Gudrun was standing in the doorway, her face pale, the wine glass trembling in her hand. Honus was right behind her, his eyes darting from me to the desk. Because I didn't have a plan yet, I did the only thing a man in my position could do. I lied. "Long trip," I mumbled, putting on my best tired old man face. I rubbed my eyes, letting my shoulders slump. The sea was rough. I think I need to sit down. "Why are you guys up so late?" Jonas moved fast, too fast. He was at my side in a heartbeat, gripping my elbow like he was afraid I'd fall, or maybe he just wanted to make sure I couldn't run. "Dad, you scared us. You were supposed to be in Oslo until Thursday. Why didn't you call?" I forgot," I said, leaning into the lie. "My phone died, or maybe I lost the charger. Everything's a bit foggy, Jonas." I saw the look they exchanged. It wasn't relief, it was predatory. Because I'd just confirmed their fake medical report, they thought the game was already won. Arrogance, that's the one thing that sinks every great empire. "It's okay." "Anna," Gudrun said, her voice dripping with fake honey as she walked over and closed the safe. She didn't even try to hide the blue folder. She just tucked it under her arm. "You're home now. You've been working too hard. We were just going over some boring tax stuff for the trust." "Tax stuff," I repeated, nodding like an idiot. "Right. Good. Jonas is good with the numbers." "I'm the best, Pop," Jonas said, leading me toward the stairs. "But we really need to talk about your schedule. You've been missing meetings. You've been asking the same questions over and over again." I stopped on the third step and looked him straight in the eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him I remembered every damn thing, from the day he was born to the way he was currently stabbing me in the back. But because I needed to know how deep this rot went, I kept my mouth shut. "Have I?" "Yeah," Jonas whispered, his grip on my arm tightening just a fraction. "You're starting to forget a lot of things lately, Dad. Don't worry, though. Mum and we're going to take care of everything. You just rest." I let him lead me to my room. I let Gudrun kiss my cheek with lips that felt like ice. I waited until I heard their footsteps retreat down the hall and the muffled sound of their celebratory clinking glasses downstairs. Only then did I lock my door. I sat on the edge of the bed, the darkness of the room swallowing me whole, my own wife, my own son. They were treating me like a ghost before I was even in the ground. Because they thought I was weak, they had left the door wide open for me to ruin them. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my burner phone, the one I kept for private maritime deals. My fingers hovered over the keypad. I could call the police, but they'd just see a confused old man and a CFO son with a stack of medical evidence. No, I needed something sharper. I needed someone who hated Jonas as much as I currently did. I dialed a number I hadn't touched in 3 years. It rang once, twice. "Hello," a woman's voice answered, sharp and guarded. "Vigdis," I whispered, my voice cracking. "It's Dad." I made a mistake, a big one. There was a long silence on the other end. Because I'd pushed her away to protect Jonas, I didn't know if she'd even listen. But then I heard her sigh. "I told you 3 years ago he was bleeding you dry, Dad," she said, her voice cold. "What did he do this time?" "He didn't just steal the money, Vigdis." I looked at the door, half expecting Jonas to be listening through the wood. "He's trying to steal my life. I'm dead on paper, honey, and I need you to help me come back to life." "I'm in Copenhagen," she said. "If I come back, we do this my way. No more protecting him. No more family first bullshit. You ready for that?" "I'm ready," I said, staring at my reflection in the window. I looked old, yeah, but the fire wasn't out yet. Because they wanted a ghost, I was going to give them a haunting they'd never forget. I hung up the phone and stared at the door. Tomorrow, the doctor was coming. Tomorrow, they'd try to take the rest of my empire. But they forgot one thing about the sea. It doesn't matter how big your ship is if the captain knows where the mines are buried. I laid back on the pillow, eyes wide open, listening to the rain beat against the glass. I wasn't going to sleep, because if I closed my eyes now, I might never wake up as a free man again. The morning light in Reykjavik was grey and unforgiving, cutting through the curtains like a serrated blade. I sat at the breakfast table, my hands folded over a bowl of oatmeal that tasted like wet cardboard. Because I needed to keep up the charade, I stared at the wall with a hollow, vacant look. Gudrun was humaning some light tune while she poured coffee, her movements graceful, practiced, and utterly murderous. "You're quiet today, Anna," she said, her voice a soft caress that made my skin crawl. "Did you sleep okay?" I can't remember if I took my pills," I mumbled, letting my lower lip tremble just a fraction. Because I saw her eyes light up with a flash of triumph, I knew I was hitting the mark. "Don't worry, dear," she whispered, patting my hand. Her skin was cold. "Jonas already set them out for you. You just need to rest. The company is in good hands." I nodded like a submissive dog. Because they were so convinced I was slipping into the fog, they didn't even bother to lower their voices when Jonas walked in. His suit crisp, his face the picture of a concerned executive. He leaned down and kissed his mother's cheek, then looked at me with that same poor old man expression I'd seen the night before. "I'm heading to the office, Pop," Jonas said, adjusted his cufflinks. "We've got some restructuring to do. Don't worry about the noise from the lawyers. Just focus on getting your strength back." The ship lanes. I started, then stopped, letting my voice trail off into a confused mumble. "The shipping lanes are fine," Jonas snapped, a hint of his real arrogance leaking through. "I'm handling it." Because he was so eager to get to the office and finish burying me, he didn't notice the burner phone taped to the underside of the dining table, recording every breath he took. As soon as the front door clicked shut, and I heard his car pull out of the driveway, I dropped the act. My back straightened, the fog in my eyes turned to ice. I didn't go to the office. Instead, I drove a beat-up old truck I kept at a rental garage to a small, nondescript cafe in the Harbour district. Ragnar Voss was already there, tucked into a corner booth, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Ragnar had been my lawyer and the keeper of the Magnusson family trust for 3 decades. Because he was the only man I could trust with the keys to the kingdom, he looked like he wanted to throw up. "It's worse than we thought, Anna," Ragnar whispered, sliding a tablet across the table. "Give it to me straight," I said. "No legal fluff." "Because I dug into the offshore subledgers you flagged, I found a hole," Ragnar said, his voice shaking. "In the last 24 months, 7.3 million euros have been bled out of Nordhaven. It's categorized as consulting fees for supply chain optimization. But those companies, they're ghosts, mailboxes in Malta and Cyprus. And who owns the mailboxes, Ragnar?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Every trail leads back to one name, Bjorn Einarsson." The name hit me like a physical punch to the gut. Bjorn, my oldest rival. We started with nothing in the 70s, but because I'd outplayed him at every turn, his empire had crumbled while mine soared. He had spent 40 years hating me, and now my own son was feeding him my life's work. "There's more," Ragnar continued. "Einar Falk, our lead internal auditor, he's vanished. Because he sent a memo to Jonas 2 weeks ago questioning these exact payments, he's been on leave ever since. Jonas told the HR department it was a personal family emergency. But Einar's wife called me this morning, Anna. She hasn't seen him in 10 days. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Jonas wasn't just a thief, he was a predator. Because Einar had found the truth, Jonas had silenced him. I can't fight this from inside Reykjavik, I said, sliding the tablet back. Jonas has the board in his pocket, and they'll believe his medical report over my word any day. I need someone who knows the back end of these contracts. Someone who isn't blinded by his golden boy charm. You mean Vigdis, Ragnar said. It wasn't a question. I mean Vigdis, because I had been a stubborn, arrogant fool 3 years ago. I hadn't spoken to my daughter since I threw her out of my office. She had tried to tell me. She had pointed at Jonas's contracts and told me they smelled like rot. But because I wanted a legacy and a son to carry my name, I chose the lie over her truth. 4 hours later, I was on a flight to Copenhagen. I found her at a small architectural firm overlooking the canal. When she saw me standing in the lobby, she didn't run to hug me. She didn't cry. She just stood there with her arms crossed, her eyes like flint. "You look like hell, Dad," she said. "No greeting, no nice to see you." "I've been better," I admitted. We sat in a nearby park, the wind whipping off the water. Because I knew she wouldn't tolerate a half-assed apology, I gave her the raw truth. I told her about the death certificate, the 18 million, the cognitive decline. Vigdis didn't look surprised. She looked exhausted. "I told you, didn't I? 3 years ago I showed you the shell companies. I told you Jonas was selling our roots to Bjorn's group, and you told me I was just jealous because he had the business mind and I just had the design eye." "I was wrong," I said. The words felt like lead in my mouth. Because I was a fool, I lost my daughter, and now I'm about to lose everything else. Vigdis looked at me for a long time. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a laptop. Because I never stopped watching the Nordhaven servers, I've been keeping my own file. Jonas isn't just selling the roots, Dad. He's prepping a fire sale of the entire fleet. 2 ports in England, 3 in Norway, all at 40 cents on the euro. The buyer is an anonymous consortium, but the signatures on the pre-contracts are already there. Jonas used your digital key while you were in Oslo. "He's liquidating the empire," I whispered. "He's not just liquidating it," Vigdis said, her voice dropping an octave. "He's handing it to his father." I frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" "I'm his father." Vigdis didn't say a word. She opened a folder on the screen labeled Personal, Confidential. It was a DNA profile comparison. It was dated 5 years ago. Because she had suspected Jonas for a long time, she'd swiped a water bottle from his desk and ran a test against a sample of mine she'd kept from a medical checkup. "Look at the markers, Dad," she said gently. I looked. The numbers didn't match. Not even close. "He's not yours," she said, and I could hear the heartbreak in her voice for me. I did a deep dive into Mom's old travel logs from 38 years ago. Every time you were at sea for a month, she was in Bergen. At the same hotel where Bjorn Einarsson was staying. Jonas isn't a Magnusson. He's an Einarsson. He's a Trojan horse Bjorn planted in our bed 40 years ago. The world tilted. Because I had spent 40 years loving a boy who wasn't mine, I had paved the way for my enemy to sit at my table. Gudrun, my wife. She had looked me in the eye every morning and lied while she watched me build a kingdom for her lover's son. "There's one more thing," Vigdis said, her fingers flying across the keys. Because I hacked into Jonas's private cloud, I found the GPS logs for his company car. 2 weeks ago, on the night Einar Falk went missing, the car was parked for 3 hours at the old ship-breaking yard in Lapland. Our yard, Dad, the one that's been closed for a decade. I gripped the edge of the bench so hard my knuckles turned white. My son, no Bjorn's son, wasn't just a thief, he was a killer, and he was using my own property to hide the bodies. If we go to the police now, Jonas will use that medical report to claim we're just trying to frame him to keep control of the money, Vigdis warned. He's already alerted the board that you are unstable. We need more than just bank records. We need to catch him in the act of the takeover. The London board meeting, I said, my voice coming back to me, low and dangerous. Friday morning? Because he thinks I'm a vegetable, he's going to ask for the final transfer of voting rights then. He'll have Bjorn in the room, ready to sign the purchase agreement as soon as the ink is dry on my incapacity papers. Then we let him, Vigdis said, a dark smile finally touching her lips. We let him think he's won, because the higher he climbs, the harder he's going to hit the ground when I pull the rug out from under him. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Jonas. Hey Pop, Dr. Nordin is coming by the house tomorrow at 10. Just a quick checkup. Mom's making your favorite lamb stew. See you then. I looked at Vigdis. He's bringing the doctor to finalize the report. He wants to lock me in my own house. Then you'd better get back to Reykjavik, she said, standing up. And Dad, try to look confused. It's the only way we're getting close enough to put the noose around his neck. Because I had spent my life as a captain, I knew when a storm was coming. I flew back that night, stepping into my house as the clock struck midnight. The house was silent, but as I walked past Jonas's office, I heard a sound, a wet, rhythmic slapping noise. I looked through the crack in the door. Jonas was in there, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his face drenched in sweat. He was frantically scrubbing a pair of heavy work boots in a bucket of bleach water. Beside him on the floor was a jacket, stained with something dark, thick, and unmistakable. Because he was so focused on cleaning the blood off his hands, he didn't see me watching him from the dark. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew where he'd been. I knew what he'd done. And I knew that if I made even one mistake tomorrow, I'd be the next thing he had to scrub away. I sat by the window, watching the rain wash over the Reykjavik harbour, letting my jaw slacken just enough to look like I was losing my grip on the world. Because I needed Jonas to believe his plan was working, I had to be the perfect victim. I had to be the old man everyone talked about in whispers. Anna, you there, Pop? I didn't turn around immediately. I counted to 3. The ships? Jonas, did we send the Baltic Fleet out? I can't remember if I signed the manifest. Jonas walked into the room, his footsteps heavy with a confidence that wasn't there a week ago. He wasn't even hiding his disdain anymore. Because he thought I was already a ghost, he treated me like furniture. The Baltic Fleet sailed 3 days ago, Dad. We talked about this, he said, his voice dripping with that fake, patronizing patience. Look, I brought a friend over, Dr. Hallgrímur Nordin. He's just here to make sure those foggy spells aren't anything serious. Nordin stepped into my peripheral vision. He looked like a man who spent more time at the golf club than in a clinic. Because Ragnar had already done the legwork, I knew exactly who this doctor was. He was a paid-for hack on Bjorn Einarsson's payroll. Mr. Magnusson, Nordin said, clicking his pen. Do you know what day it is? It's Tuesday? Or maybe the fishing season just started, I mumbled, staring at my hands. Everything's a bit grey lately. I saw Nordin glance at Jonas, a quick, sharp nod. Because they were so damn arrogant, they didn't even notice me watching them in the reflection of the window pane. They didn't see the fire still burning in the back of my eyes. Cognitive impairment is quite advanced, Nordin whispered to Jonas, loud enough for me to hear. I've already got the evaluation drafted. Based on what your mother told me about his behavior at home, I can sign off on the incapacity papers by tonight. Good, Jonas replied, his voice cold, because the board is getting restless. They need to know who's holding the wheel before we finalize the London sale. After the doctor left, I waited until Jonas went to his office to make a private call. I slipped into the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. Because I'd spent 40 years reading the currents of the North Sea, I knew how to move without making a ripple. I stood outside his door, holding my breath. "Yeah, Bjorn, it's done." Jonas's voice drifted through the wood. "Nordin's in. The old man is a vegetable. I'll have the voting rights transferred by Friday. Just make sure the shell companies in Cyprus are ready to receive the transfer. I'm not just handing you the fleet, old man. I'm taking my cut too." My blood turned to ice. Because I'd loved him as my own, hearing him call Bjorn old man, his real father, felt like a harpoon to the chest. But then he continued, and the ice turned into a jagged blade. "And Bjorn, don't think for a second you're the one calling the shots." Jonas hissed into the phone. "Once I have the Magnusson Trust, I'm liquidating the Norwegian ports too. You get the ships, I get the cash, and then we're done. Don't call me again until the London meeting." He was double-crossing his own biological father. Because he was a predator born of a liar, Jonas didn't have a loyal bone in his body. He was using Bjorn's grudge to destroy me, and then he was going to gut Bjorn's future too. I retreated to my room and dialed Ragnar on the burner. "He's moving, Ragnar. He just confirmed the London sale on the phone." "I know," Ragnar said, his voice grim. "Because the tracker on that marked trust folder just went live, Jonas just scanned the documents and sent them to a private server in London. He's added digital signatures, Arnar, your signatures. He's forging the transfer of power as we speak." "What about Einar?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What about my auditor?" "The police just called me," Ragnar said, and I heard him take a shaky breath. "Because you gave them the tip about the old maintenance yard in Lapland, they sent a team in. They found his car buried under a stack of rusted shipping containers, and Arnar, they found a body in the water hazard near the Mordar. It's Einar." The room felt like it was spinning. Because Einar had found the €7.3 million hole, Jonas had silenced him. "My son wasn't just a thief, he was a murderer. They have camera footage," Ragnar continued. "A black SUV entered the yard at 2 a.m. on the night. Einar vanished. The plates are registered to the Nordhaven Executive Fleet, Jonas's car." "Is it enough to arrest him?" I asked. Hope flared for a second. "Not yet," Ragnar sighed. "The footage is grainy, and Jonas will just claim the car was stolen or he was out for a drive. Because he's paved the way with that fake medical report, he'll argue we're just confused and trying to frame him. We need him to seal his own fate in front of the board. We need him to admit the documents are his." "Then we go to London," I said, my voice hardening into granite. "Because if he wants to play the incapacity card, I'm going to give him the performance of a lifetime." The next 3 days were a slow-motion car crash. I watched Gudrun pack my bags for a medical retreat in the UK. I watched her look at me with pity. The kind of pity you give a dog you're about to put down. Because she'd lived a 40-year lie, she was a master of the craft. "It'll be better there, Arnar," she whispered as she zipped my suitcase. "The air is softer. You won't have to worry about the ships anymore." "The ships," I repeated, looking out the window. "Where are the ships, Gudrun?" "They're safe, dear," she said, a small triumphant smile touching her lips. "Jonas is taking care of everything." As we boarded the private jet for London, Jonas sat across from me, tapping away at his laptop. He looked like the king of the world. Because he was so blinded by his own success, he didn't see Vigdis boarding a commercial flight 2 gates over. He didn't see the net closing in. We landed at Luton and were whisked away, to a high-rise office overlooking the Thames. The boardroom was cold, glass, and steel, filled with the directors I'd known for decades. Bjorn Einarsson was already there, sitting in the back like a vulture, waiting for the lion to die. "Gentlemen," Jonas said, standing at the head of the table. He looked at me with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Because my father's health has taken such a tragic turn, we are here today to ensure the continuity of Nordhaven Maritime. I have the medical evaluations, the trust mandates, and the purchase agreements ready for signature." He slid a stack of papers toward me. My hands shook as I picked up the pen. I looked at the board members, some of whom looked away in shame. Because they believed the lie, they were ready to let him gut my empire. I looked at Jonas. "Is this what we decided, Jonas? I can't remember the numbers." "Just sign it, Dad," Jonas whispered, leaning over me, his breath smelling of expensive coffee and cold ambition. "Do it for the family. Do it so you can finally rest." I felt the weight of the pen. Because I was at the edge of the cliff, I had to choose, jump or fight. I looked at Bjorn in the back of the room. He was smiling. He thought he was finally getting his revenge for 40 years of failure. I leaned in close to Jonas, so close only he could hear me. The confused look vanished from my face like a mask being ripped away. "You should have cleaned the boots better, Jonas," I whispered. His face went white. His hand, which had been resting on my shoulder, began to tremble. What did you just say?" he stammered, his voice cracking in the quiet room. "The blood," I said, my voice now loud, clear, and as steady as a mountain. "Bleach doesn't get it all out of the seams, son. Neither does a fake medical report." I stood up, pushing the chair back with a sharp screech that echoed through the room. I wasn't hunched over, I wasn't shaking. I looked at the board, then at the door as Ragnar and Vigdis walked in, followed by two men in dark suits who definitely weren't shipping executives. "The meeting is now in session," I said, looking Jonas straight in his terrified eyes. "And because I'm still the captain of this ship, I'm officially relieving you of your duty." Jonas lunged for the papers on the desk, but because the police were already moving, he never reached them. The trap was sprung, but as the handcuffs clicked, I saw Bjorn standing up in the back, his face a mask of fury. The battle for the company was won, but the secret that was about to come out next was going to burn the house of Magnusson to the ground. The London air was thick with the smell of rain and exhaust, a far cry from the salt spray of Reykjavik. We were 30 stories up in a glass and steel tomb, the kind of place where men in $3,000 suits decide who lives and who starves. Because I was supposed to be a man with a rotting brain, I let Jonas lead me by the arm, my cane clicking rhythmically on the marble floor like a ticking clock. "Just a few signatures, Pop," Jonas whispered as he pulled out my chair at the head of the boardroom table. "Then we can get you back to the hotel. Mom's got your favorite tea waiting." I didn't look at him. Because I needed him to stay arrogant. I stared at a spot on the mahogany table like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. Gudrun sat to my right, her face a mask of tragic devotion. She looked like the perfect grieving widow, which was funny, considering I was sitting right next to her. Bjorn Einarsson was tucked in the back corner, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He looked like a wolf watching a wounded elk. Because he'd spent 40 years losing to me, he couldn't hide the predatory glint in his eyes. He thought he'd finally won. "All right, let's get this over with," Jonas said, standing up and addressing the board. "Because my father's cognitive decline has accelerated since the Oslo incident, we've reached a point where the stability of Nordhaven Maritime is at risk. We have the medical evaluation from Dr. Nordin, the family trust mandates, and the purchase agreement for the secondary fleet." He started sliding papers across the table. One by one, the board members looked at them and then at me. I kept my jaw slightly slack. I let my hand tremble when I reached for a glass of water. Because they saw exactly what they expected to see, a broken old man, nobody questioned a damn thing. Is this the Baltic deal? I mumbled, my voice sounding like gravel. No, Dad, Jonas said, his voice sharp now, the mask of the devoted son slipping. This is the transfer. You're handing the voting rights to me so I can finalize the deal with the Einarsson group. It's what's best for the company. And for the family, I asked, looking up at him. Especially for the family, he snapped. Because Jonas was so sure he'd already crossed the finish line, he didn't notice the door at the back of the room opening. Ragnar Voss walked in, followed by 3 men in dark, charcoal suits, auditors from the big firms, the kind of guys who can smell a forged signature from 3 miles away. Jonas frowned, his eyes darting to Ragnar. Ragnar, this is a private board meeting. What the hell is this? Because there were some irregularities in the digital filing system. Jonas. The auditors felt it was necessary to be present for the final verification, Ragnar said, his voice as calm as a calm sea before a hurricane. Jonas scoffed, throwing his hands up. Irregularities. I've spent 18 hours a day fixing the mess my father left. There are no irregularities. Dad, just sign the damn papers so we can move on. I looked at the documents. The insurance claim for 18 million euros, the transfer of 62% of the voting power, the sale of our most profitable ports to Bjorn's shell companies for pennies on the euro. Because I'd been playing the fool for weeks, Jonas had gotten lazy. He hadn't just forged my name. He'd used a digital key that Ragnar had tagged with a hidden tracking code 3 days prior. You're sure you want me to sign this, son? I asked. You're sure these are the right papers? I'm positive, Jonas said, leaning over the table, his face just inches from mine. I could smell the sweat on him now. I prepared them myself. I vetted every line. Now sign. You heard him, Bjorn called out from the back, a smug grin on his face. Let the boy lead, Anna. You're done. I didn't sign. Instead, I stood up. I didn't use the cane. I didn't tremble. I straightened my back until I heard my spine pop, and I looked Jonas dead in the eyes. The fog in my expression vanished, replaced by the same ice-cold stare that had built an empire from nothing. Because you just confirmed, in front of the entire board, that you prepared and vetted these documents personally, I said, my voice booming in the quiet room. You've just signed your own confession. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Jonas froze, his hand still hovering over the papers. Gudrun gasped, her glass of wine hitting the table and staining the white lace runner like a fresh wound. Dad, what are you? Sit down, Jonas, I barked. Because I'm still the chairman of this board, and you're still an employee. And as of 10 seconds ago, you're an unemployed one. Ragnar stepped forward and opened a laptop, projecting a series of bank statements onto the massive screen at the front of the room. Because we tracked the 7.3 million euros that left Nordhaven's accounts over the last 2 years, we found they didn't go to consultants. They went to a holding company in Cyprus. A company owned by Bjorn Einarsson. The board members started murmuring, their faces turning from pity to fury. Bjorn stood up, his face reddening. That's a lie. Those were legitimate supply chain fees. And what about the digital signatures? I asked, pointing at the screen. Because Jonas was so eager to steal the crown, he used a copy of the trust mandate that Ragnar had specially coded. Every time that file was opened or edited, it pings a server in Reykjavik. It shows Jonas's IP address at 3 in the morning, adding my signature to a document I never saw. You're crazy, Jonas stammered, backing away toward the window. You're senile. You're making things up. Am I? I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. Because I've been recording the foggy conversations in my own house. I have you and your mother discussing the insurance payout. I have you telling Bjorn that you were going to gut the Norwegian ports behind his back. Bjorn's head snapped toward Jonas. What? What did he say? Oh, he didn't tell you, Bjorn. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Because Jonas doesn't have a loyal bone in his body. He was planning to squeeze you out of the deal the second I was in the ground. He had a secondary contract ready to flip the ships to a Chinese firm for double what you were paying. He wasn't bringing you into the family business. He was using you to bury me, and then he was going to bury you too. Bjorn let out a roar of rage and lunged at Jonas, but the auditors and a couple of board members stepped between them. The room was a circus of betrayal. Because the truth was finally out, the wolves were eating each other. Gudrun, I said, looking at my wife. She was sobbing now, her head in her hands. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? 40 years and you were raising his son in my house. I did it. For Jonas, she wailed. Bjorn was going to lose everything, and Jonas deserved a future. He had a future, I shouted, slamming my hand onto the table. He had everything, but because you taught him that a lie is as good as the truth, he turned into a monster. Vigdis walked into the room then. She didn't say a word. She just walked up to the table and laid a final folder in front of the board. Because Jonna was so focused on the money, he forgot about Einar Falk. Einar didn't just find the money trail. He found the evidence that Jonas was selling our navigational codes to competitors. Where is Einar, Jonas? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. The police found his car at the Lapland yard. They found a body in the water. Because you were seen there on the night he vanished, the London police aren't here for a financial audit. The double doors at the back of the room swung open again. This time, it wasn't lawyers. It was 4 officers from Scotland Yard, flanked by 2 detectives in overcoats. Jonas Magnusson? The lead detective asked, his voice echoing in the sudden, terrifying silence. We're taking you in for questioning regarding the murder of Einar Falk and multiple counts of corporate fraud. Jonas looked at me, his face pale as a ghost, his eyes wide with a realization that came far too late. Dad, please, you can't let them do this. I'm not doing anything, Jonas, I said, sitting back down in my chair. Because you chose to sink this ship, you're the one who has to go down with it. As the officers moved in to cuff him, Jonas didn't fight. He just looked at Gudrun, who wouldn't even lift her head. But just as the lead detective reached for Jonas's arm, Jonas let out a jagged, hysterical laugh and looked back at me. You think you won, Anna? Jonas hissed, the handcuffs clicking shut. You think you're the hero? Look at the screen. Look at the last transfer I made before we walked in here. Because you were so busy playing detective, you didn't see where the real money went. Nordhaven is already empty. I didn't just sell the ships, I sold the debt. My heart skipped a beat. I looked at the screen, and my blood ran cold as a new set of numbers began to scroll. Because Jonas had one last card to play, the empire I spent 40 years building, the air in that London boardroom was so thin you could have snapped it like a dry twig. Jonas was leaning back, handcuffs dangling from one wrist, wearing a smirk that said he'd just pulled the ultimate ace out of his sleeve. He'd just told me he sold the debt, that Nordhaven was a hollowed-out shell. Because he'd spent his whole life watching me build, he thought he knew exactly how to tear it down. You really think I'm that slow, Jonas? I said, my voice barely a whisper. I looked at the screen. The numbers were scrolling, red and angry, showing a massive transfer of liability to an offshore account in the Caymans. Because Jonas was so blinded by his own brilliance, he didn't notice that Ragnar was tapping a command into his tablet. "See that clearing code at the bottom?" Ragnar asked, his voice cutting through Jonas's smugness. "Because you used the marked digital key to authorize that debt flip, the transaction didn't go to the Caymans. It hit a dead-end server we set up 3 hours ago. The money never left Iceland, Jonas. And the debt? It's still sitting right on your shoulders, personally guaranteed by the power of attorney you forged this morning." The smirk didn't just fade, it disintegrated. Jonas's face went from porcelain white to a sickly shade of grey. Because he'd tried to be a predator, he'd walked straight into a cage of his own making. "You set me up," Jonas hissed, lunging across the table. But the officers were faster. They tackled him into the mahogany, the sound of his cheek hitting the wood echoing like a gunshot. "No, Jonas," I said, standing over him. "You set yourself up. Because you thought I was a relic, you forgot that a captain always knows when there's a leak in the hull." I turned to Gudrun. She was shaking, her hands over her mouth, looking at the man she'd spent 40 years lying to. Because she'd chosen Bjorn's blood over our life, she had nothing left but the wreckage. "Take them out," I told the detectives. The room cleared out, leaving just me, Vigdis, and Ragnar. The silence was heavier than the noise. Because the adrenaline was fading, my 70-year-old heart was finally starting to feel the weight of the day. I sat back down, my hands actually trembling for real this time. "It's over, Dad," Vigdis said, placing a hand on my shoulder. Her touch was the only honest thing I'd felt in weeks. The months that followed were a blur of depositions, lawyers, and cold, hard reality. Because Jonas had been so sloppy with the Einar Falk situation, the police found the GPS pings on his phone that placed him at the Mordar exactly when Einar's heart stopped. They found the 7.3 million euros in Bjorn's Cyprus accounts. It wasn't just a business failure, it was a criminal slaughter. Jonas and Bjorn went down for the count. Because Iceland is a small place, the scandal hit like a tidal wave. Jonas was sentenced to 20 years for corporate fraud and his role in Einar's death. Bjorn? He lost his fleet to the state to pay back the embezzled funds. He's sitting in a cell now, realizing that his Trojan horse son was the one who finally finished him off. Then there was Gudrun. The divorce was fast and clinical. Because I didn't want to be the monster she portrayed me to be, I didn't leave her on the street. I gave her enough to live in a small apartment far from the harbour. But because the truth was out, she'd lost her status, her friends, and the son she'd sold her soul to protect. The silence in her life was her real prison. One afternoon, about 6 months after the London nightmare, I sat in my new office, a small glass-walled room overlooking the Reykjavik docks. I'd sold the mansion. It had too many ghosts, too much bleach smell from Jonas's boots. Vigdis walked in with a stack of papers. Because I wanted to make things right, I pushed a leather folder across the desk to her. "The CEO position is yours, Vigdis," I said. "No strings, no protecting the family. Just run it the way it should have been run from the start." She didn't take the folder. She didn't even look at it. "No," she said, her voice flat and firm. "What do you mean, no?" I asked. My old arrogance flaring up for a second. "I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom." "Because you're still thinking like the old Arnar," she said, crossing her arms. "I'm not your good child replacement for Jonas. If I come back to Nordhaven, it's not to be a queen. It's to be a mechanic. I'm not taking a throne, Dad. I'm taking a job." "Explain," I said, leaning back. "Because we concentrated all the power in one man's hands, we almost lost everything. she said. "I'll only come back if we restructure the whole damn thing. An independent board that can fire me. A real whistleblower system so the next Einar Falk doesn't end up in a Mordar, and an external audit every 6 months. No more Magnussen rules, just maritime law and transparency." I looked at her, really looked at her, because I'd been so obsessed with Jonas's yes man attitude, I'd completely missed the fact that my daughter was the only one with the iron in her blood to actually lead. "Done," I said. A year later, I moved to a small cottage in Helisander, right on the edge of the world. My house is small, and the only thing I have to manage is the fire in my hearth and the salt on my windows. Vigdis comes to visit once a month. Because she's running the company with a velvet glove and an iron fist, she doesn't have much time for small talk. We sit on the porch, wrapped in wool blankets, watching the Nordhaven tankers cut through the grey Atlantic. "You ever regret it, Dad?" she asked me last night. "Not the company, I mean Jonas, knowing he wasn't yours." I watched a ship disappear over the horizon. "I don't regret loving him, Vigdis, because for 38 years he was my son in every way that mattered to me. My mistake wasn't the blood. Blood is just biology. My mistake was the pride." "Pride?" "Yeah," I said, looking at her. "Because I was a big man with a big empire, I wanted people around me who told me I was right. Jonas knew that. He fed my ego like he was fattening a calf for the slaughter. I pushed you away because you told me the truth, and the truth made me feel small. I chose the lie because the lie felt like respect." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "The kid who always says yes is the one you gotta watch. But the kid who's brave enough to tell you that you're full of it, that's the one who actually loves you." I built a €1 billion empire by reading the wind and the waves, but I nearly drowned because I couldn't read the hearts of the people at my own dinner table. If you're building something, a business, a family, a life, make sure you aren't just surrounding yourself with mirrors. Mirrors only show you what you want to see. You need windows. You need people like Vigdis who will show you the storm before it hits. Because in the end, loyalty isn't about standing behind someone. It's about having the guts to stand in front of them when they're walking toward a cliff. Thanks for sticking with me through the storm. If you want more stories about the high stakes of the high seas and the price of power, make sure to subscribe. And let me know in the comments. If you found out your legacy was built on a lie, would you burn it down to save the truth? Or keep the lights on for the sake of the name?